Star Wars has hundreds of ships, and most of them exist to blow things up. But the ones that actually move the galaxy forward, the transports, the freighters, the haulers, nobody talks about those. So today, we're ranking every single transport ship in Star Wars by how much they actually matter, and we're starting at rock-bottom.quadjumper. This is the Honda Civic of Star Wars, not a good Honda Civic, the one with 200,000 miles on it, a missing hubcap, and a check engine light that's been on since the Clone Wars. The Quadjumper is a boxy, no-frills tugboat designed for one thing, moving cargo on the cheap. It's got 4 engine pods strapped to a hull that looks like someone welded a shipping container to a power generator. For weapons, basically nothing. Lightly armed in Star Wars terms means you might as well be throwing rocks out the window. Here's the thing though, operating costs on this thing are dirt cheap, which is why fringe traders love it. Not because it's good, because it's all they can afford. Its most famous appearance? The Force Awakens. It's sitting on Jakku when Rey and Finn are trying to escape the First Order, and they actually run toward it first. Then a TIE fighter blows it to pieces before they can get inside. That's the Quadjumper's legacy. It exists to get destroyed so the Millennium Falcon can have its big entrance. It literally died so a better ship could look cooler. Some fans argue it's a perfectly adequate budget option for solo operators, and sure, technically it flies, but its entire canonical contribution to the franchise is exploding on a landing pad, which is, not ideal for a starship, but at least the Quadjumper is honest about what it is. The next ship on our list? It pretends to be elegant while serving one of the most oppressive regimes in galactic history, Lambda-class T4, a shuttle. If the Quadjumper is the car you drive to a job you hate, the Lambda-class is the car that pulls up when you're about to get fired. This is the Empire's company shuttle, 20 meters of clean lines, tri-wing design, and the quiet promise that someone important just arrived and your day is about to get significantly worse. Here's the thing about the Lambda. On paper, it's not impressive. 14 passengers, a minimum crew of 4, 80 metric tons of cargo, a Class 1 hyperdrive, and 4 retractable laser cannons. That's it. 850 kilometers per hour in atmosphere, which is fine. Not fast, not slow. Company car speed. But those 14 passengers, those are the people who can order orbital bombardments. That's the entire point. The Lambda doesn't need to be a gunship because the Lambda is the gun. It delivers the people who pull the trigger on everything else. And visually, nothing in Star Wars communicates the Empire is here faster than those 3 wings folding down on a landing pad. It's the opening shot of Return of the Jedi. It's all over Andor. It shows up in The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan Kenobi like a recurring bad dream. Every single time a Lambda touches down, someone's life is about to change for the worse. That's not an accident. That's design language working exactly as intended. Some fans argue the tri-wing silhouette is more instantly recognizable than the X-wing, and honestly, they might be right. Others say it's overused in the Disney-era shows, that every time a director needs to say Empire bad, they just land another Lambda. Which is, not ideal, but also kind of proves the point. You don't overuse something that doesn't work. It's the visual shorthand for institutional power. No other transport in Star Wars carries that weight. But if the Lambda represents the Empire's iron fist, the rebellion needed something to punch back with, U-wing. If the Lambda is the Empire's limousine, the U-wing is a stolen pickup truck with a machine gun bolted to the roof. And honestly, that's exactly what the rebellion needed. Formerly designated the UT-60D, this thing is 17.3 meters of pure insurgent engineering. It carries 8 combat-equipped troops, flies at 850 kilometers per hour in atmosphere, and packs a Class 1 hyperdrive, which means it can jump across the galaxy just as fast as an Imperial Star Destroyer. It's armed with twin blaster cannons and missile pods, because when you're dropping a strike team into hostile territory, you need to be able to shoot your way in and out. Cargo capacity sits at 20 metric tons, not galaxy-changing volume, but enough to keep a Gorilla Cell supplied and operational. Here's the thing about the U-wing though, when it first showed up in Rogue One, it was basically set dressing. A cool-looking ship that existed to get characters from point A to point B before everyone died. Functional, sure. Memorable? Barely. Then Andor happened. Andor took this background prop and turned it into the literal backbone of how the rebellion actually works. Suddenly the U-wing wasn't just a taxi, it was the supply chain, the extraction plan, the difference between a successful raid and a massacre. Every mission hinged on whether one of these things could get in fast enough and leave before the Empire locked down the sector. The show understood something Rogue One didn't bother with. The rebellion isn't won by heroes with blasters. It's won by logistics. And the U-Wing is rebel logistics, where the Lambda projects authority just by landing. The U-Wing projects desperation, speed, and the kind of scrappy tactical thinking that keeps an outgunned resistance alive. It doesn't move fleets, it moves the 6 people who blow up the thing that changes the war. But if you think a scrappy transport is impressive, wait until we talk about the single most famous ship in the galaxy, one that technically has zero business being on this list, Millennium Falcon. The most famous ship in all of fiction is, on paper, completely unremarkable. A YT-1300 light freighter from Corellian Engineering Corporation, 34.37 meters long, 100 metric tons of cargo capacity. That's respectable for a private vessel, but it's not going to make any freight company lose sleep. Hundreds of YT-1300s rolled off the assembly line. Most of them hauled mundane cargo between mid-rim systems, and nobody ever learned their names. But this one has a Class 0.5 hyperdrive. That's the fastest civilian legal rating in the galaxy, and it didn't come from the factory that way. Every single thing that makes the Falcon special is a modification. The quad laser cannons, the concussion missile tubes, the 1,050 kilometers per hour atmospheric speed, all of it bolted on, rewired, and held together with what I can only assume is duct tape and spite. The ship has over 60 years of service history across every original trilogy film and all 3 sequel films, and in basically every appearance it's either broken, about to break, or recently fixed by someone hitting it. Here's the thing. As a transport, the Falcon is honestly mid. It moves 100 tons and 6 passengers. That's a Tuesday for most commercial haulers. The reason it matters is that it moved the right people at the right time, smuggling the plans evacuating Hoth, running the Kessel route. The Falcon's entire legacy is punching absurdly above its weight class, not because of its design, but because of the lunatics flying it, and the fandom knows this. There's a genuine years-long debate over whether the Falcon is a character in its own right or just a vehicle. People get heated about this. They get even more heated about how the sequel trilogy handled it, which is a conversation I'm not touching with a 34-meter pole. But if you think one modified freighter pushing its luck is impressive, wait until you see what happens when an entire crew turns a similar ship into a full military operation. Ghost VCX-100. On paper, the Ghost has no business being on anyone's radar. It's a Corellian Engineering VCX-100 light freighter, 36 meters long, hyperdrive rating of 1.5, atmospheric speed of 800 kilometers per hour, cargo capacity of around 50 metric tons when fully converted. That's less cargo than the Falcon, slower in hyperspace, and roughly the same size. By every measurable stat, it's just another freighter. But here's the thing. The Ghost didn't need to be the fastest or the toughest. It needed to be everything at once. Hera Syndulla and Kanan Jarrus turned this ship into a fully operational Rebel cell across all 4 seasons of Rebels: transport, gunship, command center, living quarters. 5 to 8 crew members rotating through roles, armed with nose cannons, dorsal turrets, and a concussion missile launcher. That's not a freighter loadout. That's a warship pretending to have a day job, and the results speak for themselves. The Ghost's crew outmaneuvered Imperial blockades, ran supply missions, extracted high-value targets, and engaged capital ships. Not because the VCX-100 was built for any of that, but because the people inside it figured out how to make it work. The ship showed the wider rebellion something critical before they ever had a proper fleet. You don't need a destroyer. You need a crew that trusts each other and a ship that won't fall apart while they prove it. That's why Rebels fans defend this thing like it's a family member. The Ghost wasn't just Hera's ship. It was home. It shows up in novels, cameos, and live action, and still has people arguing that the rebellion criminally underutilized the VCX-100 platform years later. Which honestly, fair point, you'd think after watching one crew nearly topple an Imperial sector with a single freighter, someone in Alliance Command would have ordered a few dozen more. But if the Ghost represents scrappy Rebel ingenuity, the next entry is the exact opposite. Pure Imperial brute force logistics with zero personality, Imperial at-hauler. Nobody has ever looked at an at-hauler and felt anything. No excitement, no fear, no nostalgia. It's a flat hovering platform that carries walkers from point A to point B, and that's it. That's the whole ship. And honestly, that's exactly what makes it worth talking about. The AT Hauler is approximately 35 meters long, carries a command crew of 2 to 3, and its entire purpose is lugging Imperial walkers down to planetary surfaces. We're talking 2 AT-ST units, or a single AT-AT configuration, depending on the loadout. It has 0 weapons. None. Not a single laser cannon, not a turret, not even a strongly worded letter. If something attacks an AT hauler, the AT hauler's official strategy is hope the TIE fighters show up. But here's the thing. Without this floating forklift, the Empire's entire ground game collapses. Those AT-ATs stomping across Hoth, they didn't walk there from orbit. Somebody had to carry them down, and that somebody was a ship so boring it barely got a name. The hover platform design means it doesn't even need a starport or landing pad. It just drifts over whatever patch of dirt the Empire wants to ruin that day and drops its payload, which is, convenient if you're trying to occupy an entire galaxy. It showed up in Solo, a Star Wars story, doing exactly what you'd expect. Hovering, carrying things. Being rectangular, the operating costs were reportedly so high that the Empire only deployed them during major offensives, which means every time you see walkers on a battlefield, some Imperial accountant somewhere had a very bad day approving that requisition form. The AT hauler is the unglamorous truth behind Imperial dominance. It's a parking garage with thrusters. Nobody writes fanfiction about it. Nobody builds detailed models of it. It just quietly makes the scary stuff possible, then disappears from the conversation entirely. But if you think a weaponless walker platform is underwhelming, wait until we get to a ship that's been punching above its weight class for over 50 years of galactic history. CR-90 Corvette. The CR-90 Corvette is literally the first ship anyone ever saw in Star Wars. Before lightsabers, before the Force, before Darth Vader's breathing, there was a white Corvette screaming across the top of the screen with a Star Destroyer chasing it. And somehow, nearly 50 years later, this thing is still showing up in new content like it never got the memo that it's supposed to be outdated. Built by the Corellian Engineering Corporation, the CR-90 stretches 150 meters long, runs on a crew of 30 to 50, and carries over 3,000 metric tons of cargo. That's a massive jump from anything we've talked about so far. We went from personal freighters hauling maybe 100 tons to a ship that moves entire supply chains in a single trip. 4 laser cannons, 2 shield projectors, a hyperdrive rating of 2, and an atmospheric speed of 950 kilometers per hour. Not the fastest, not the toughest, but enough of everything to matter. Here's why the CR-90 refuses to die. It sits in this perfect sweet spot between scrappy transport and proper warship. Think of it like a World War II destroyer. It's not going toe-to-toe with a Star Destroyer and winning. Nobody's claiming that. But it's large enough and armed enough that you can't just ignore it, and fast enough that catching one is genuinely annoying. That versatility is exactly why it shows up across 50-plus years of galactic history virtually unchanged. The blockade runner configuration, which is what the Tantive 4 was running in that iconic opening, is distinct from the straight military variant. Rebels use them. Fringe factions use them. Senators use them as diplomatic vessels while secretly smuggling Death Star plans in the cargo hold, which is, not ideal for maintaining plausible deniability. Fans love to argue about whether the CR-90 actually holds up in combat or if it just coasts on nostalgia. The answer is both. It's not winning any fights it shouldn't, but it keeps showing up in Rogue One and/or Rebels and basically every era of canon because nothing else fills that role as cleanly. But if you think 3,000 tons of cargo capacity sounds impressive, wait until you meet the ship that makes the CR-90 look like a grocery run. GR-75 Medium Transport. Here's a number for you, 19,000 metric tons. That's the cargo capacity of the GR-75. To put that in perspective, every single ship we've covered so far on this list, combined, doesn't even come close. The CR-90 Corvette carries 3,000 tons and we were impressed. The Millennium Falcon hauls 100. This thing could swallow the Falcon's entire payload 190 times over and still have room for snacks, and nobody knows its name. The GR-75 Medium Transport was built by Gallifrey Yards, a company that clearly understood one thing. Nobody needs their cargo ship to look cool. At 90 meters long with a crew of 6 to 8 people, this is essentially a flying warehouse operated by fewer people than it takes to run a restaurant. It has a hyperdrive rating of 4, which is slow. Genuinely slow. Like everyone else already got there and had lunch slow. Armament, 2 laser cannons, sometimes 0, sometimes they just didn't bother. But here's the thing, this is the ship that kept the Rebel Alliance alive. Not the X-Wing, not the Millennium Falcon, this glorified space container, every blaster, every ration pack, every thermal detonator that ended up in Rebel hands almost certainly rode inside a GR-75 at some point. The entire supply chain of a galactic insurgency ran through a ship most fans couldn't pick out of a lineup. Its biggest moment on screen? The evacuation of Echo Base in The Empire Strikes Back. Those transports punching through the Imperial blockade while ion cannons provided cover. Roughly 30 seconds of screen time. That's it. That's the entire cinematic legacy of the most logistically important vessel the Rebellion ever operated. The design was so cost-effective that basically everyone used them. Civilians, mercenaries, military fleets, you name it. If you needed to move a staggering amount of stuff from one star system to another without spending a fortune, this was your ship. It's the long-haul trucker of the galaxy. No glory, no fanfare, just tonnage. Model builders love it. Logistics nerds respect it. Everyone else forgets it exists, which is, exactly how a good supply chain works. But if you think 19,000 metric tons sounds like overkill for a transport, wait until you see what the Trade Federation considered a reasonable landing force. C-9979 landing craft. Everything we've talked about so far has been some variation of ship that moves stuff. The C-9979 is a ship that moves conquest. Built by Howard Chall Engineering for the Trade Federation, this thing is 370 meters of pure logistical nightmare. One ship, 114 battle tanks, 1,890 battle droids, a crew of 50 to 60 operating the whole thing. That's not a transport, that's a city-ending event with landing gear, and it's fast. Hyperdrive rating of 0.8. Which means it arrives before most military vessels even finish their pre-jump calculations. It was purpose-built for atmospheric entry at full cargo load, so there's zero need to stage in orbit and shuttle forces down piecemeal. You just point it at a planet and deliver an entire army in one pass. Efficient, terrifying. Both. Here's the thing, when you watch The Phantom Menace and those C-9979s descend on Naboo, that's the moment the prequels established what industrial-scale invasion actually looks like. One landing craft touches down and suddenly Theed has a droid problem it cannot solve, two land and the planet is functionally occupied. The math is just brutal. A single vessel carries enough firepower to overwhelm most planetary defense forces, and the Trade Federation had fleets of them. Now it's not a fighter, independent combat capability is basically zero. No heavy weapons worth mentioning, minimal shielding for a ship its size. It needs escort cover or orbital superiority to operate safely, but that's the point. It doesn't need to fight. By the time it lands, the fighting is already decided. It's a delivery mechanism, and what it delivers is an entire ground war. Later variants showed up throughout Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, and the Clone Wars series, but nothing hit quite like that first Naboo deployment. Technical fans argue it's one of the most logistically impressive transport designs ever created, and honestly the numbers back them up, which is, not ideal if you're on the receiving end. But if you think landing an army is impressive, wait until you see the ship that makes the C-9979 look like a grocery run. Action 6 Bulk Freighter. After all that military spectacle, let's talk about something nobody makes movies about. The Action 6 Bulk Freighter is the most important ship in the Star Wars galaxy that you have never heard of, and I can prove it. Built by the Corellian Engineering Corporation, the Action 6 stretches 210 meters long and exists for exactly one purpose: moving an absurd amount of stuff from one place to another as cheaply as physically possible. That's it. That's the whole ship. No dramatic boarding sequences, no heroic last stands, no force-sensitive pilots threading it through asteroid fields, just cargo. 36,000 metric tons of it. To put that in perspective, that's nearly double what the GR-75 can carry. And the Action 6 does it with a skeleton crew of 6 to 12 people depending on how much automation you're running. That's fewer people than it takes to staff a restaurant, moving enough goods to supply an entire colony world. The efficiency is almost offensive. It's got a Class 3 hyperdrive, which is slow. It tops out at 650 kilometers per hour in atmosphere, which it barely ever enters because this thing was designed for space-to-space operations. Its armament consists of 2 to 4 point defense cannons, which is the ship equivalent of bringing a fly swatter to a gunfight. But here's the thing, none of that matters. The Action 6 doesn't need to be fast or well armed because it travels established trade routes operated by massive cargo consortiums and mega corporations who pay other people to handle security. This is the ship that represents how the Star Wars galaxy actually functions when nobody's shooting at each other. Billions of tons of food, fuel, building materials, and consumer goods moving between star systems every single day on ships that look like floating warehouses. The galactic economy's entire backbone is ships like this, and they show up in exactly 0 dramatic moments across the franchise. Most fans only know the Action 6 from X-Wing Alliance or Scattered Legends novel references, which is, not ideal for a ship class that literally keeps civilization running, but if you think a workhorse freighter is an unlikely candidate for this list, wait until you see what the New Republic built when they finally had the budget to stop scrounging. Starhawk class battleship. Every ship we've covered so far has some version of the same story: scrappy rebels, desperate smugglers, underfunded militaries making do with whatever they could get their hands on. The Starhawk is where that story ends. Assembled at Nadiri dockyards for the New Republic using salvaged Imperial Star Destroyers as raw material, the Starhawk class stretches 1,097 meters long, carries a crew of 2,000 to 3,000, and packs 144 starfighters into its hangars, 60 turbolaser batteries, 40 ion cannons, 10 tractor beam projectors, a Class 1 hyperdrive, over 10,000 metric tons of cargo and supply reserves. This thing was considered the most heavily armed capital ship of the entire post-Empire era, and honestly, looking at those numbers, nobody's arguing. But here's what makes the Starhawk genuinely significant. It's not just a warship, it's a mobile base, capable of independent fleet operations for extended periods, functioning as a self-sustaining military installation that happens to have engines. You don't need a supply chain when you are the supply chain. The Rebellion spent years limping between systems in GR-75s, praying their hyperdrive didn't give out over hostile space. The Starhawk is what happens when those same people finally get a budget, and the poetic justice of literally recycling the Empire's own Star Destroyers into something better. Introduced in the Aftermath trilogy novels between 2015 and 2017, with visual confirmation showing up in The Rise of Skywalker, the Starhawk represents a narrative turning point that doesn't get enough credit. This is the design that said the rebels actually won. No more scrounging, no more converting cargo haulers into makeshift carriers. The New Republic could now strip down captured warships and rebuild them on their own terms, with their own infrastructure. The scrappy underdog became the institution, and not everyone loves that. The fandom is genuinely split on this one. Some fans see the Starhawk as exactly what the New Republic needed: appropriate hardware for a legitimate government. Others look at it and see a Star Destroyer with different branding, which is literally true this time since it's built from actual Star Destroyers. That's what winning looks like. It's triumphant. It's also a little sad, but if the Starhawk represents the peak of purpose-built military transport capability, the next entry makes it look like a rowboat, because we're about to talk about a ship that's over 3 kilometers long. Lucrehulk Class LH 3210, Cargo Raider. Everything else on this list is a vehicle. This is a civilization. The Lucrehulk Class LH 3210 cargo freighter, designed by Horsch Kessel Drive, stretches 3,170 meters from end to end. That's over 3 kilometers. To put that in perspective, you could line up nearly every other ship we've talked about today, nose to tail, and still have room left over inside this thing's cargo sphere. It carries 400,000 metric tons of cargo. The Action 6, which we just called impressive, hauls 36,000. The Lucrehulk carries that 11 times over and still has room for a small army, which conveniently it also carries. Over 50,000 beings can be transported aboard a single Lucrehulk. That's not a crew complement, that's a population. The design features a modular cargo sphere that can detach and operate independently, meaning the ship can literally split itself in half and still function. It's hyperdrive capable, despite being the size of a small city, rated at 1.5 to 2 depending on modifications. For something this massive, that's borderline absurd. And its armament? 50 quad laser cannons, which sounds like a lot until you remember. This thing is 3 kilometers long. That's basically the equivalent of putting a screen door on a fortress. Purely defensive, technically. Here's where the debate gets interesting. You know this ship, you've seen it. It's the massive donut hovering over Naboo in The Phantom Menace, serving as the droid control ship that coordinated the entire Trade Federation invasion. And that's exactly where the fandom splits in half. Was the Lucrehulk always designed as a weapon? Or did the Trade Federation take the single most impressive cargo hauler ever built and pervert it into a warship? The evidence honestly supports both readings. The defensive armament profile screams transport. The troop capacity screams military. The modular sphere screams logistics platform. The fact that it can independently sustain entire star systems screams floating infrastructure project that someone decided to strap an army to. It's not a ship. It's a statement. A single Lucrehulk can feed a planet, supply a war, or blockade a system, sometimes all three at once. And that's the full scale of what it takes to move a galaxy. From the Quad Jumper's 50 metric tons, a ship so small it's basically a space van, all the way up to the Lucrehulk's 400,000, a vessel so large it stops being a ship and starts being a place. Every single transport in between tells the same story. The Star Wars galaxy doesn't run on lightsabers or the Force. It runs on cargo holds, supply chains, and the ship's unglamorous enough to keep everything moving while the heroes aren't looking. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.